Imagine the ruler of the greatest empire of antiquity, whose power stretched from India to Egypt. Suddenly, an insignificant town on the periphery of his domain dares to challenge his might. This was not just a political incident, it was a deeply personal insult that ignited an uncontrollable rage, leading to one of the most epic confrontations in history. Today, we will delve into the events that drove the Persian king Darius I to seek the complete destruction of Athens. Subscribe to the channel and don't forget to like the video. Is it possible that one seemingly insignificant event on the edge of a vast empire could ignite such fury in the heart of its ruler that he would vow to wipe an entire city off the face of the earth? This is exactly what happened with the great king Darius I and ancient Athens. To understand the depth of this resentment, we must transport ourselves back to a time when the world was different, and honor and power were measured not only in gold, but also in audacity. The Persian Empire stretched for thousands of kilometers from its eastern borders to the Aegean Sea. It comprised numerous peoples, including the Ionian Greeks who inhabited the coast of Asia Minor. They lived under the rule of Persian satraps, and their discontent was growing. In 499 BC, their patience ran out. The Ionian Greeks rose up in rebellion, seeking to throw off the Persian yoke. It was a desperate but entirely predictable move for the freedom-loving Hellenes. It was at this moment that Athens entered the historical arena. The city, which for the Persian Empire was just one of many small settlements across the sea, decided to intervene. Driven by a sense of ethnic solidarity with their Ionian brothers, the Athenians sent 20 warships to help the rebels. It seems that such a small number of ships, only 20, would have been a drop in the ocean for a mighty empire. But the significance of this act was much deeper than just the number of ships. It was not just a detachment sent into battle. It was an open, bold challenge to Persia. For Darius, who considered himself the ruler of the world, such interference from such an insignificant city was an act of unheard-of disobedience. It was as if a small provincial village had dared to declare war on the capital of a huge state and even help the rebels. Darius's anger began to flare, and this spark was a harbinger of the coming storm. Subsequent events only added fuel to the fire. In 498 BC, the combined forces of the rebellious Ionians and their Athenian allies took a bold but extremely reckless step. They marched on Sardis, an ancient and wealthy city that served not only as an important trading hub, but also as the administrative center of the Persian satrapy of Lydia. Sardis was a symbol of the Persian presence in the region, the seat of the satrap's residence, and the center of imperial life. The rebels managed to capture the city, and during the assault and the chaos that followed, Sardis was burned to the ground. Imagine the scene, flames engulfing a city built largely of wood, spreading rapidly through narrow streets and alleys. Clouds of smoke rose into the sky, carrying the news of destruction and rebellion. But what angered Darius most was not so much the destruction of the city itself or the loss of its riches, but the destruction of the city's main sanctuary, the temple of the goddess Cybele. For the Persians, who, despite their Zoroastrian faith, showed remarkable tolerance and respect for the local cults and deities of their subjects, the burning of the temple was not just an act of vandalism. It was a monstrous sacrilege, a direct insult to the gods, and a trampling of all religious traditions. It was an unheard-of blasphemy, a blow not only to Persian power, but also to their worldview, their understanding of order and respect. Such an act, committed with the participation of the Athenians, could not go unpunished. In Darius's eyes, this was not just a rebellion, it was a bold, blasphemous provocation that demanded the most severe retribution. News of the fall and burning of Sardis, and especially of the desecration of the temple, reached the royal palace in Susa. One can only imagine Darius's reaction when he was informed of what had happened. This was not just a report of a military defeat. It was a blow to his authority, his honor, and the sacred foundations of his empire. According to the famous works of the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, King Darius, upon learning of the audacity of the Athenians, asked a question that went down in history. The Athenians? What kind of people are they? There was no curiosity or respect in this question, only bewilderment mixed with contempt for an unknown but already hated enemy. After that, so as never to forget the need for revenge, Darius gave a very unusual but deeply symbolic order. He instructed one of his servants who was serving him at dinner to repeat the same phrase 3 times. "Lord, remember the Athenians." This quote, passed down from generation to generation, vividly illustrates not only the depth of Darius's personal resentment, but also his unwavering determination. This was not just a momentary anger. It was a cold, calculated decision that would become the driving force behind Persian foreign policy for years to come. Even if this fact seems anecdotal, it perfectly shows how the king's personal emotions and deep feelings could directly influence the strategic decisions of a vast empire. It was not just a political calculation, but an oath taken at the royal table that had to be fulfilled at any cost. From then on, every meal was a reminder to Darius of the audacity of the Athenians and the retribution that awaited them. However, the story of Darius's anger is not limited to these first sparks. To fully appreciate the extent of his fury, one must understand what the Persian Empire was like under his rule. It was not only the largest, but also one of the most efficient empires of the ancient world, stretching from the shores of India to the Nile Valley, from Scythia to the Aegean Sea. Darius, a great organizer and conqueror, inherited and significantly expanded the empire founded by Cyrus the Great. Under his leadership, the empire was divided into 20 satrapies, each ruled by a governor or satrap, and having its own system of taxation and administration. Roads, such as the famous Royal Road, connected these remote corners, ensuring rapid communication and movement of troops. A currency system based on the gold daric unified the economy. Within this grandiose structure, Darius saw himself not merely as a ruler, but as a divine elect, the King of Kings, whose power was absolute and unquestionable, and whose mission was to bring order and prosperity to the world, which the Persians called Pax Persica, or the Persian peace. Anyone who dared to disrupt this order, whether a rebellious satrap or a distant people, questioned not only his authority, but the very structure of the world. And so, on this vast map of the world, somewhere on its western periphery, lay the small, by Persian standards, polis of Athens, which not only dared to challenge Darius, but also committed acts that he would consider unheard of barbarism. Returning to the Ionian revolt, we should delve deeper into its causes. The Ionian Greeks, who lived on the rich coast of Asia Minor, were under double pressure. On the one hand, they were accustomed to self-government in their city-states, and the Persian administration, although not always harsh, was still an external, alien power. On the other hand, the economic interests of the Ionians often clashed with Persian policy, especially with regard to maritime trade. It was at this moment of ferment that the Ionian tyrant Aristogoras of Miletus, who had initially acted with Persian sanction but then suffered defeat in an expedition to Naxos, decided to raise the banner of revolt. He went to mainland Greece in search of support, and it was in Athens, which had recently overthrown tyranny and established democracy, that he found a response. Athens' motives were complex. In addition to the aforementioned ethnic solidarity, they probably saw this as an opportunity to weaken Persian influence in the Aegean Sea, secure their trade routes, and perhaps even expand their own influence. It was a calculated but risky move. Sending 20 ships was not just a symbolic gesture, it was a serious commitment, one that Athens was unable or unwilling to see through to the end. When the rebellion began to falter, the Athenians withdrew their ships, leaving the Ionians alone to face Persian vengeance. This probably only increased Darius's anger. Athens had not only started the rebellion, but had also abandoned its allies, demonstrating, from the Persian point of view, unreliability and treachery. This was followed by an act that perhaps surpassed even the burning of Sardis in terms of its offensiveness to the Persians, the execution of the ambassadors. In the ancient world, ambassadors enjoyed immunity. This was an unwritten rule observed even between the most bitter enemies. Violating this rule was considered an act of extreme barbarism and sacrilege, for ambassadors were messengers whose safety was guaranteed by the gods. When Darius sent his ambassadors to the Greek city-states demanding earth and water, symbols of submission signifying recognition of Persian rule, he expected that even if not everyone agreed, at least the ambassadors would be received with dignity. Instead, the Athenians threw them into a chasm known as the Barathron, a place of execution for criminals, and the Spartans threw them into a well, suggesting that they take the earth and water there. This act was not simply a refusal, it was a demonstrative, humiliating murder that completely destroyed any hope of a diplomatic solution and represented a flagrant disregard for sacred norms. For the Persians, who, despite their belligerence, valued order and diplomacy, this was an unheard-of display of hubris bordering on madness. It not only strengthened Darius' resolve, but also gave him moral justification for the most severe punishment. Darius' personal resentment was inextricably linked to his conception of royal power. Persian kings believed that their rule was granted by Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity of Zoroastrianism. They possessed Farn, or Varna, divine grace that ensured their success and legitimacy. Any challenge to their authority was thus a challenge to the divine order itself. A small polis, which Darius did not even consider significant enough to know its name, dared not only to support the rebels, but also to desecrate Persian lands and then kill his envoys. This was not simply a violation of the political order, it was an attack on his Farn, his divine right to rule. The combination of these events, military support, religious desecration, diplomatic insults, and personal offense, ignited the fury of Darius, who wanted to wipe Athens off the face of the earth. This is not just a historical episode, but a lesson in how minor conflicts can escalate into large-scale wars that affect the course of civilization. Thank you for your attention to this fascinating story from the ancient world. Subscribe to the channel and don't forget to like.